Hello and welcome to another video about some quote-unquote real events and stuff that are clearly just Doctor Who adventures, therefore proving that the Doctor is real and she'll one day, many years ago, take me off for adventures. And when I say real, I mean these are all pre-existing things that supposedly actually happened, though I'm kind of doubtful about some of them. But before we begin, this is YouTube. For some reason, YouTube likes it when I tell you to like, subscribe, and hit bells. Failing that, YouTube gets off when you leave in comments about other things that could be Doctor Who plots, which I could maybe use in another video if enough people want that. So if you have ideas, get commenting. Anyway, first up, a tale of a saint and some water monsters. I did a history short about this. This is Loch in Ireland. It's a sea loch, meaning it's open to the sea, and according to ancient history, /myth, /whatever, it was once home to a giant monster, Sweloch. Apologies for my pronunciation. Sweloch was giant, mean, and covered in eyes. Its name means the many-eyed one. Anyway, one day the locals got really pissed off at it for being large, terrifying, and eating people probably. So they asked the great Saint Columba, also known as Columba, to deal with that. And he did. Exactly how depends on the retelling, but it's either by wit, word, or by sword. And Sweloch was never seen again. Now, Columba later got embroiled in the first copyright case, kicked off a tribal war, and kinda had to leave Ireland for Scotland. This suited the local church just fine, because either he'd successfully bring Christianity to the locals, or he'd die horribly in the attempt and be a martyr. Win-win for the church. But succeed he did, and he founded the Abbey of Iona, and was only narrowly beaten out as the patron saint of Scotland by St. Andrew, he of the much better branding X-shaped cross. Anyway, in Scotland, he did his greatest act. He walked all the way to Loch Ness and saw a monster there. The first sighting of Nessie ever recorded. He yelled prayers at the beast and it went down beneath the waters, always to be seen again, and to appear in dodgy photographs. Truly a fate worse than Sweloch's, whatever that was. Okay, so how is this a Who story? Simple, there's only one water monster. Call the story The Water Horse and the Saint, or something better. And the beast is a Merca, a sea devil pet that turned up in Warriors of the Deep and Legend of the Sea Devils. It somehow got released from suspended animation early and swam free, becoming friends with this Irish monk, with a good line in tricks and bullshitting. It's a Dragonheart thing. He and Columba do this scam, where the Merca threatens the locals, and Columba comes in with the power of God and saves them. Christianity is stronger, Columba gets paid, the Merca gets fed, and the people are happy. Everyone's a winner. At least according to Columba. Everyone except for the Doctor. You see, this is a first Doctor story, kind of like Marco Polo. Columba saw the TARDIS land and commandeers it, intending to use it to make more miracles and help his mission. And he's dragging the Doctor and the companions with him until they teach him its secrets. Over 8 or so episodes, the experience, all the stuff I mentioned earlier, the defeat of Sweloch, the copyright case, where someone made an illicit copy of a book, the battle that followed, the escape to Scotland, the founding of Iona, and finally the introduction of Nessie. So the start and end of the story are pseudo-historicals dealing with the beast, and the midpoint is a pure historical but actual history. Anyway, over these episodes, the Doctor works out Columba's deal, where the Merca came from, and realizes that while most sightings of Nessie are fake, the first one wasn't. So when he finally gets the TARDIS back, he materializes it under Loch Ness, ready to capture Nessie once it goes beneath the waters again. He releases it into the North Atlantic, where it'll live quite happily for centuries, and become the origin for most of humanity's sea monsters. Hell, there could be a sequel story where St. Brendan the Navigator meets the beast and has mass in its back. Irish saint stories are wild. But back to Nessie, you might wonder how the Merca gets to Loch Ness. Unlike Swilly, it's an inland loch. It's got no connection to the sea except for a very small river. Luckily, Mercas can breathe there, and a number of Nessie settings say she can walk on land quite happily. Hilariously, some people have actually suggested that Nessie's an elephant, and the long neck and tiny head that's sometimes seen is the trunk being used as a snorkel. Anyway, on to part 2, the ghostly Battle of Edge Hill. The Battle of Edge Hill took place in 1642 and was one of the bloodiest battles of the English Civil War, where the Royalists of Charles I fought the Parliamentarians of Oliver Cromwell. Reasons for the war are kind of complicated, but it basically boiled down to the king wanting absolute power to rule the country, and the Parliamentarians not wanting that. And the parliamentarians won, Charles was beheaded, and England became a republic before it was cool, for about 10 years. You see, the parliamentarians were a massive mix of all sorts of groups, from rich landowners to proto-communists, and Cromwell's ones ended up dominating. They were the Puritans, a bunch of religious psychos that banned stuff like Christmas and the theatre, and enjoyed killing people slightly more than the average 17th century brat. Cromwell became Lord Protector, which is totally not a king, and to show that it's totally not a king, his son Richard succeeded him for about 6 months. You see, the people had quite enough. It was basically a religious fundamentalist theocracy, and instead invited Charles's son, also called Charles, to be king, on the proviso that he not tried with absolute power, and that he spends most of his time partying. And as for the Puritans, a bunch of them left in a huff because they couldn't boss everyone else around anymore, and they ended up in America, where they rebranded themselves the Pilgrims and successfully convinced a lot of people that they'd left because other people were just mean to them. But what's up with Edge Hill? Well, a little while after the battle, people claimed to have seen it replaying in the sky, that they could smell the gunpowder, that they could hear the cries of the dying. King Charles, the not yet beheaded, even sent some men to check it out for themselves, and they reported back that it was true. They even recognized their friends' faces. A pamphlet was written called A Great Wonder of Heaven about the events, and the locals gave the dead proper burials in an effort to stop it. But it kept happening on and off for years, growing dimmer, quieter, until one day it stopped. Do I think any of this actually happened? Well, the battle did, but no. But it is kinda ridiculous that this isn't already a Doctor Who story. So here's my pitch, a 13th Doctor story called The Bloody Sky. It's about a non-corporeal alien that's trapped on Earth. It feeds on pain, fear, that sort of thing. So it eats murder and feasts on battles, just biding its time until humanity develops high-tech space travel, so it can hitch a lift, possess an astronaut, kill the rest of the crew so they can't stop it, and escape home. Anyway, by the 17th century, it's got tired of small meals when it happens upon violent deaths, and the occasional feast when it finds a battle, so it's taken to travelling around and possessing powerful people to foment wars, so it can eat well all the time. The battle itself is the alien's doing. Anyway, 13 eventually separates it from its host and traps it in a projection replay of the battle, letting it eat its fill. Its drive to feed is so strong that it couldn't stop if it wanted to. What 13 doesn't explain is that none of this is real. It thinks it's eating the largest feast it's ever had, but it's starving to death. That's why the ghostly battle fades over time. It's dying. So this is kinda dark. That's deliberate. I'm riffing on 13's weird tendency to be randomly horrific. Like her systems line in Kerblam.
The systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem.
Or her choosing to humanely suffocate or starve spiders to death and arachnids in the UK. This is exactly the sort of cruel that a few doctors would do, but only 13 would do it while telling us that it's kindness. And only 13 would believe it. Anyway, on to a double story about the Greenland Vikings. In the early medieval period, Greenland had a thriving population of Norse, living in a couple of towns on the coast. And when I say thriving, I mean in Viking Age Greenland terms. It was a few thousand people. The world was in the grip of the medieval warm period. Summers were long, winters were cool, and people loved Greenlandic walrus ivory. Life was good. But then a few things happened. The medieval warm period ended, the ice got thicker, the summers got shorter, and the Silk Road opened up, allowing the trade of non-walrus ivory into Europe. So the Greenlanders' main export basically collapsed. As a result, outsiders stopped visiting for a while, which eventually became about 350 years. When some missionaries finally arrived to convert them to Protestantism, they found some crumbling ruins. And while people can make some very educated guesses, we don't actually know 100% what happened to them. It was likely a slow collapse, less food to grow, needing to slaughter animals to make up the difference, less animals to work the farms, etc. The Vikings didn't really attempt to acclimatize to the ice, like the Inuit, so their lives just got nastier, more brutish and shorter. It's possible that some escaped to Iceland or Norway, maybe an unknown ship arrived during the collapse. It'd most likely have to be a ship from the outside, as Greenland has few trees, and as a result, they probably know shipwrights in their communities. One thing we can be sure of, though, is that the Inuit didn't wipe them out. The Thule, the current Inuit inhabitants of Greenland, were just arriving around the time of the collapse, but they tended to stay in different places, and a fight of that size would be recorded in their oral storytelling. There was possibly a fight or two, but not a wipeout. Okay, so how is this a Who story? This is going to be a Silurian story called Fire from Below. I'm thinking a third Doctor story. The Norse are living a precarious existence, things are looking bad, when a doorway in a remote rocky outcrop opens up, and emerge some Silurians. What follows is the usual classic Silurian story. They woke up. They want the planet. The Doctor tries to broker peace and convince him to go back to sleep. But a fight breaks out and many are killed. The title, Fire from Below, comes from the Silurians' heat blast weapons. Anyway, the Silurians decide that Greenland wouldn't be any more hospitable for them than it is for the Norse, but they want to know more about the present rulers of the planet, so they decide to take as many of the Norse as they can with them into their underground base, for interrogation, vivisection, and other terrible things. The Norse really aren't into this, though, so there's a fight in the gateway to the underground base, and in a tragic ending, the doors are closed before the Doctor can save most of them. All he can do is take the survivors and leave them off in Norway, to quietly disappear into history along with their civilization. Then, years later, I want a sequel called Ice from Below, make it a 12th Doctor story. It's the modern day. Unit wants the Doctor's help with dealing with Silurian war parties erupting from the ground, killing people, stealing stuff, and making no grand pronouncements but taking back the planet. The Doctor arrives during an attack in, say, Maui. He tries to talk them down, even pleading in Silurian, but they won't stop killing and thieving. Then it gets even stranger when the Doctor hears one of them yelling about Odin, and then gets shot and unmasked. He's a Viking. You see the Norse, taken underground, turned the tables on their captors and massacred them. Then they found themselves in this strange, cold place, the Silurian cryochambers, which they took to the Norse Hell, which was very cold. The Greenland Vikings were Christians, but finding themselves in the hell of their ancestors shatters their faith and they re-embrace what they remember about Odin and Thor. Then they let the cold take them, the Silurian cryo process, ice from below. They wake up centuries later in the modernish day and use the Silurian secret global network between their frozen sanctuaries and come to the surface raiding, wearing Silurian armor and using their weaponry. I'm not sure where it goes from there, but I'm pretty sure 12 would find a lot to yell and speech about. Now, like last time, we have an honourable mention, a totally real event that's already a Doctor Who story. I am, of course, referring to the Mary Celeste, the 1800s ship that was mysteriously found abandoned in the middle of the ocean. There's all sorts of legends, such as there was a disturbed meal and a bloody sword found on board, but the basics are that the crew left in an orderly fashion. They left their personal belongings and took the lifeboat. There was some damage to the hold, which was waterlogged. The most common theory that's pretty low in the fanciful scale is that they believed the cargo, which was alcohol, was going to explode. So everyone got into the lifeboat and tied it to the ship, just to wait and see if it exploded. But it either came loose or they cut the line and lost the ship. The crew and passengers dying at sea. The Mary Celeste turns up in the Hartnell story The Chase, the Daleks' third big story after their debut, the invasion of Earth. The plot is kind of a tongue-in-cheek affair with the Daleks chasing the TARDIS crew all throughout time and space, ending up all sorts of places for short adventures. One of those places being the Mary Celeste. The TARDIS crew arrive first, but soon leave when they realize where they are. And then the Daleks arrive and scare the crew into abandoning ship. Andrew Smith was working on a story called The First Sontarans in the 1980s. It would have featured the Mary Celeste, but the story never happened. And at some point, between initial plans and it finally surfacing as a lost story in Big Finish, Smith had done so much research into the real Mary Celeste that he felt he knew the people on board, and no longer felt okay about dramatizing their deaths. So he completely changed the plot. Anyway, before we hit number 1, if you really like the video, you can afford it, please feel free to check out the Patreon to support the show more directly. There's all sorts of rewards, including bonus reviews and requests. And in our final entry, a celebrity historical, The Mysterious Stranger. This is about Mark Twain, not based on paranormal stuff or anything like that, but a story about how he became anti-religious and misanthropic as he got older. Now this happened for a lot of different real reasons, but I thought it was fun to mix it with his inability to ever finish his story, The Mysterious Stranger, which just got more anti-religious every time he rewrote it. You might have come across The Mysterious Stranger in the film The Adventures of Mark Twain, or my review of the film The Adventures of Mark Twain, or in a YouTube video called something like The Creepiest Scene from Any Kids Movie. In the story, some children meet Satan, not the famous Satan, his nephew. Satan does all sorts of bad magical stuff and gives the kids terrible existential horror. In the most famous version, he creates people, gives them lives, and then to the horror of the children destroys them again. And why? Because life is meaningless. And him doing this isn't bad because he doesn't know what bad is. Now, when I did my review of the film, I theorized that The Mysterious Stranger was Twain doing two things. One, he was looking at the usual Christian depiction of God, but as an equal and finding him irredeemable. He creates life just to have it suffer and die. And two, he was talking about himself as a writer, a creator. He creates beings, gives them life, and destroys them. To his characters, he is literally a god, and just as irredeemable. Like I said, he became very misanthropic by the end of his life. So The Mysterious Stranger would be the Who episode that brings Mark Twain to this point. It opens with a man going about his business, living his life, all while an unseen Twain is narrating. Then suddenly the narration falters. He doesn't like how the story's going. He doesn't like the details, the wording. And the man suddenly realizes he's fictional and screams in terror as Twain abandons the plot and he's destroyed horribly and he ceases to exist. And some other people in the street see this happen and scream in terror. Cue theme music. Then it all happens again with slight variations. Twain is trying to perfect his plot, creating and killing people as he goes. And this isn't deliberate. Twain has no idea what's going on. The land of fiction, where fictional characters live, it's a classic Who thing, has somehow linked up with Twain. So the characters he creates aren't being made in the land of fiction where rewrites and changes are no big deal, but are being created where the story is set. And because they're in the real world, they're real people with real lives and real deaths. Of course, this also means that the characters from his finished works are all out there too, and he wrote some unpleasant stuff. Now, I've not got much beyond the concept, but after the link is severed and his creations are transported to the land of fiction, Twain is left shattered. He had the power of a god, and he created and killed hundreds of people. And he can't even let himself truly feel guilt because that'd be too easy. He literally had no idea what he was doing.
I can do no wrong, for I do not know what it is.
He's left a completely broken man, someone who feels truly inhuman. And he works on the story, The Mysterious Stranger, essentially as a form of self-harm. But he never manages to finish it, because finishing the story would mean an end to his torment. Plus, he is the Satan in the story, constantly living that life of creating and destroying through his writing.
People are of no value. We could make more sometime.
So which doctor should meet Twain? Well, a new Who doctor would be better able to empathize with him, but a classic doctor would be much more likely to leave him to stew in his misery, which feels much more real to me. So I'm going with a Sixth Doctor, especially early Sixth Doctor. He's got a good mix of dickery and loving literature. Plus, Perry will get a kick out of meeting Twain. So, who should play Twain? Simple, Jeffrey Combs. Herbert West, Wayun, Ratchet, Milton Dammers, and many more. Combs is the right age. He's physically perfect for it. He can play Southern, and he's previously played Poe, Lovecraft, and L. Frank Baum. He's basically a one-man, old-timey American author Power Ranger squad. Casting Combs would also work fantastically if you depicted the Twain story, The Mysterious Stranger, in the episode, with Combs playing Satan. Combs is very good at playing emotionally dead malevolence. Plus, he's a prolific voice actor and Twain is public domain, so it'd totally be all over Big Finish within days. Anyway, that's it for part 2. I hope you enjoyed. Who wants part 3?